So the other planets that have names of the gods, like Jupiter or Mars, do they happen to coincide with the qualities we think of as Jupiter and Mars? Or are they different?
What do you think of the qualities of Jupiter? Are the bigness?
Well, no, Jupiter's like Zeus, the
Zeus,
king,
yeah,
and Mars, because that sounded like Pluto, and Mars is more warrior. So.
Well, Mars is to do with aggression, assertion, the warrior archetype, and Jupiter, it kind of is the big planet, and it amplifies, it exalts, it raises things up, it improves, and it's to do with success. Granting success, it has a regal quality, that's true. So it's not that you can reduce the, it's not that you can link back the planets in astrology just to the Greco-Roman gods, but the Greco-Roman gods personify certain aspects of the archetypes. So the archetypes in astrology are more general, like the moon is the anima, the child, and the mother. 3 archetypes mapped onto one, and with Zeus, there's the quality of Saturn too, because he's like a patriarchal ruler, like a Yahweh kind of. So that's more to do with Saturn. So it's not a direct one-to-one correspondence, but certainly there's some relationship between the Greco-Roman gods.
So did you have to kind of look at different cultures and their interpretation of astrology, because it'd have to be almost a collective collection? This culture says the moon is, this culture says it's this, and they're going to sometimes maybe disagree, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about the Vedic astrology, but I mean, what you can do is you could see how the Hindu pantheon of gods and goddesses, how they illuminate different aspects of the Western astrological system. Like the example of Shiva, Pluto is to do with Shiva Shakti, Kundalini power, or like something like a Kali type goddess would be like a moon Pluto, a creative, destructive, feminine female goddess. So I think, there are cultural differences in the way that astrology is interpreted, but I think, for me at least, ultimately there seems to be this like Platonic Pythagorean element to astrology whereby the archetypes are actually rooted in reality itself, a metaphysical framework. And this goes beyond what Jung would say, because he was very much concerned with just what's happening in the psyche, not really doing metaphysics. But Richard Tarner said that there are at least 3 dimensions to the archetypes in astrology, and they are the Platonic metaphysical dimension, the Homeric mythic dimension, and then the Jungian psychological instinctual dimension. And so you can approach an understanding of the archetypal principles in astrology through all those perspectives.
Would the metaphysical be more like deterministic, or?
Yeah, it's not. No, metaphysical. Astrology. It's not deterministic in that, like I said, it's not concretely predictive. You can't, and it's not causal in the sense of one billiard ball strikes another one, strikes another one. It doesn't work like that. It seems to be to do with the framework of meaning within which events unfold. So you can still, you can still understand what happens in your life today by looking back last week, last month, and you can see the chain that leads to where you are now. But if you look at astrology, that shows like a framework of meaning within which those day-to-day, moment-to-moment events take place. So in Aristotle would call that a formal cause rather than an efficient cause, to give it the jargon. An efficient cause is the A, B, C, D, E chain, and a formal cause is the pattern in an acorn that makes it grow into an oak tree. That kind of deeper pattern. So the idea is that there's a formal cause in reality as a whole, or in the universe, and that is reflected in the archetype studied in astrology. And so that doesn't make invalid the A, B, C, D, E causes, but it just creates the meaning within which they take place. It's quite difficult to understand.
It's like a gestalt.
It's what, sorry?
It's like a gestalt.
Yeah, gestalt is a good word. It's complex holism is a term that's been used, where both there's an individual autonomy and concrete specificity, and also there's like a universal holistic perspective, and the two are kind of held in balance. Microcosm, macrocosm is the old way that used to be described, as above, so below. But what I try to do here is, I think a lot of astrologers wheel out the microcosm, macrocosm idea, or the as above, so below. I try to give that a more contemporary perspective by explaining it in depth psychological and scientific terminology. I found for me personally that I was not satisfied with what seemed to me to be an ancient view of the universe, when the modern view, the modern scientific view, seems to discredit astrology. I wanted to show how, on the new paradigm sciences at least, or the developments in modern physics, could disclose a worldview in which astrology made more sense, that it didn't seem totally ridiculous. The idea that everything is interconnected, that modern physics has disclosed, or at the quantum level there seems to be something like an underlying ground, or things far apart in space can be entangled, quantum entanglement, and things that are, seem totally disparate have a connection at some deeper level. So there's a lot of things in the new sciences that are conducive and compatible with an astrological view of the world. But it's not deterministic in the sense of, like, you go to an astrologer and they tell you, this planet's moving into a certain position in your chart is going to cause this. It's not that. It's certainly not fatalistic. I do believe myself in fate, but I don't believe that astrology can show you that fate. It can help you understand the meaning, the themes, the patterns, but not the specific fate.
How do these planets develop these attributes that you're talking about? How does it get developed?
How do they work? Sorry.
You're saying planets have certain forces associated with them.
Oh, how do they ever?
How do they develop that?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process actually. It's something like Pluto was only discovered in 1930, and so I think a lot of it is astrologers working with charts, trying to figure out what planets mean. It goes back to astrology goes back to Mesopotamia. So this is like in 3,000, 4,000 years BCE. And if you look at Mesopotamian astrology, there's a semblance of a connection to modern astrology, but only just. It's like a thin thread, and then over the years, over the centuries, there's an ever greater refinement. Astrology flourished in Egypt and then in Greece, and there's a cross-fertilization of ideas, and then they obviously took on the names of the Roman names of the planets. But even if you go back to early 20th century, astrology is very, very literal, very predictive, and it's for a long time astrology was just to do with kings and queens had astrologers, not and then it became more democratic. In the 20th century, it was rolled out to the masses, as it were, and I think that's really when psychological astrology was born. There was a guy called Dane Rudyard, who was a French guy, and he moved to the US, and he was very influential in launching psychological astrology. He was a theosophist, and also read Jung and Hindu philosophy, and he kind of brought it all together. So it's just an evolution. My other book, which I hadn't brought along, is on the new planet, or the planetoid dwarf planet Eris. They discovered Eris in 2005, and then Pluto was demoted.
Yeah.
No longer a planet. So I wrote a book on what might Eris mean in astrology, and I identified these principles by which we might go about trying to figure that out. Like, you can look at synchronistically what's happening in a period of history when a planet was discovered. Well, Uranus is to do with revolution, and that was discovered between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, 1781. So there was a revolutionary flavour in the culture of that time, and it turns out, through the empirical study of Uranus in charts, that is what Uranus means. Or Pluto was discovered when nuclear power was discovered, or when in between the two world wars, when Freud's ideas were being disseminated to the wider culture about the depth, deep unconscious, and instinct, and the id, And when fascism was rising, Pluto to do with power drives and kind of fascist, zealous extremism. So there's a correlation between what a planet means and well, there seems to be a correlation between what a planet means and what was happening in history at that time.
Is that information readily accessible, or is it only in the book that you wrote? These associations between what was happening in history and the nature of the planet.
Yeah, I discussed them in my book on Eris. It's called Discovering Eris. This only applies, of course, to the modern planets, because the planets such as Saturn have been known about since antiquity. So the meaning of those has kind of evolved, as I was just saying, over the centuries. But the modern planets, I had a friend who wrote a dissertation on at CIS in San Francisco on Neptune, the discovery of Neptune. Because the discovery of Neptune, there don't seem to be as many overt correlations to historical events as for Uranus and Pluto. But he wrote this huge dissertation basically looking at developments in the 19th century and how they mapped onto the meaning of Neptune, the romantic movement or the experimentation with drugs and the rise of kind of this universal compassion as a result of Dickens' novels on the suffering of children in Victorian England, and it's a really kind of nuanced study of 19th century. So I think there's something valid here, but part of his study was that he looked at how astrologers had initially worked with Neptune when it had been discovered. So the late 19th century, early 20th century, astrologers were attributing quite a wide range of qualities to Neptune, and it was like a progressive process of refinement through working with charts that a consensus was arrived at that Neptune means to do with dissolution and transcendence, spirituality and the imagination and so on. And I think really it's only with Richard Tarnus's archetypal approach to astrology that we can really see the archetypes behind these planets. Tarnus makes explicit this correlation between planets and archetypes in a way that's not been done before, even though there are many Jungian-oriented astrologers. I recommend his book, Cosmos and Psyche. Really.
Astrology is built on the principle of synchronicity. And until...
but not calling those terms.
No, we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, but until a person has experienced the synchronicity, it's just a word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Otherwise, we approach it from the point of view, okay, where's the evidence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I still think there can be a case for evidence. Perhaps not in a positivistic scientific sense, but like Cosmos and Psyche, where Tarnus points to historical correlations with specific planetary alignments. But it's true what you say about synchronicity. Until you've experienced synchronicity, or even when you do experience them, you can feel like you're going crazy, and these kind of things shouldn't be happening. And it's the same attitude that people bring to astrology. This is nonsense. How can planet relate to what I'm thinking? It just seems, in terms of what we learn about reality from our education, it just seems impossible. And so that's why I felt the need to write this book rather than just get into the stuff that I wanted to do. Because my excursion into science, it took me 11 years because I'm just far more at home in archetypal, mythic kind of stuff than the scientific world.
In your book, do you describe a new alignment that we have now? And
the one I just discussed, the Uranus-Pluto?
Yes, do you describe
briefly
it in depth? Because you talked quite a bit about Mars and... I don't know,
yeah, in my book on Eris, I talk about contemporary events in terms of what that might mean, the possible meaning of Eris as the new planet. But I edit a journal called Archetypal, A-R-C-H-A-I, Archetypal Journal, and there you can download from the Archetypal Journal website. There are 2 quite long articles on current world events.
Okay.
Richard Tarnus wrote one, and then I co-authored the most recent one.
Oh, great.
So yeah,
Thank
that's where
you.
you.
Yeah.
I think that's a good note to end on. So thank you very much for your attention.
Sure.